I made this. You made this? There's a special place in my heart for the ability to return projectiles. Movement around projectile spam is its own kind of fun, but there's a magic to turning the tide on your opponent. For how cool they are though, it's not common that you'll run into a reflector in the best fighting game ever made. The subject of this video. Among Xrd's cast of 25, only 5 have them, and yet between them, none of them operate exactly the same. For example, Zato and Leo's reflectors are what you would expect for the most part, sending a projectile back at your opponent, and while it's not that important, the projectile now counts as your possession, and so you can't get hit by it. Pretty immediately understandable, but not as straightforward as you might expect. Anything that you might want to envision as a ball normally works fine, as well as some attacks that are straight in their trajectory, like Gunflame that crawls along the floor. However, even then, it won't always act as you might expect. For example, Heihyun's tuning ball will travel at whatever speed it's going when it hits the reflector, and cannot be changed by either the reflector or the Heihyun, which, for some reason, Dustloop says still belongs to the Heihyun. Raven's projectile also isn't the exact same after being reflected, as now it no longer has a slowdown property. Once you learn that not everything acts the same, most of the time what is and isn't going to work is pretty intuitive. You can't reflect supers, and while that might get you caught off the first time round, it's a hard and fast rule of the system, and so once you know it, it'll never change. Less obvious though are buttons that just will not reflect under any circumstances that do follow the rules, like Johnny's coin, which attempting to reflect back will get you hit. Okay, so Zato sucks. Even though both of these characters can directly reflect the same attacks, they are not the same. Since Leo goes into an invulnerable enough for this video state during the reflector, many attacks won't reflect, but also won't count as a hit. The most surprising one to me being Bishop Runout that merely has the ball stop in its place, so I guess it technically doesn't break the super rule, but it certainly doesn't act as I was expecting. This makes one reflector, that also doubles as a parry, substantially better than the other, even though they might be generalized to the same thing. Dizzy's reflector, despite being a super, can be thought of as almost exactly the same as Zato's, though the invulnerability and the cost of activation makes its application substantially different, aka a bit shit. Acting very differently from these, however, are Faust and Potemkin, whose reflectors are that in name without being that so much in function. Instead of turning attacks back directly, Faust and Potemkin take a portion of the projectile and creates their own unique projectile from it. Additionally, what these characters consider a projectile is expanded from the last two, like, for example, being able to reflect May dolphin hoops. Faust's is largely a gimmick, reflecting back a single hit baseball that has different trajectories depending on if it hits the bat's tip or hits shallow. Potemkin's flick is much more versatile and genuinely useful, creating a slow-moving projectile that doesn't destroy projectiles, but decays projectiles. Say Venom Ball level 2, which hits a total of 3 times, is inside of a Potemkin ball. The level 2 ball will interact with the Pot Ball, decaying the total hit points by 1 every 8 frames. If the total amount of hits comes to 0, then the projectile is destroyed. The trade-off for these characters being able to reflect more than the other 3 is that their reflectors don't change who is in possession of the projectile. Faust can reflect every Venom Ball from level 0 to level 3, but doing so on a level 3 will result in being hit, since these attacks also merely decay the projectile by 1, and creating a new projectile on the same frame. That means the other 5 hits still belong to Venom, and so you will still be hit. On Faust, that's pretty important to know, since any multi-hitting projectiles will hit you under every circumstance. Less immediately noticeable is how this also applies to Potemkin. Flick also only decays a projectile by 1, but since the projectile that it spawns will also decay the projectile that it's interacting with, you're normally not going to get hit. The keyword there is normally. If the attack has enough hits and is traveling fast enough, the flicked projectile will still end up hitting as it exits the pot ball. It's something you should remain cautious of if you're playing pot, though it is rare, and considering Potemkin can reflect things that nobody else can, like Mini Faust and 100-ton weight, you should always keep Flick in mind as a very strong, if situational option. Reflectors aren't very common, and whether or not it's a good option comes down heavily to context, though if there's anything important to take away from this video, it's this. Leo can reflect his own projectile, but he can't rally with Pot Ball for some reason. See, this is what's wrong with modern fighting games from 2014, those lazy devs.